What do you do in a relationship when both people are in need of validation and comfort and being seen and understood, but neither of you feels like you can give that? The tendency at times like this is for each person to kind of clobber over the same need for that emotional empathy, that comfort, that validation. And there can be this tendency to rob each other of that experience. Let's say one person starts sharing their emotions, their experience, what they're going through, their struggles, their concerns, and then the other person responds by doing the same thing, right? Sharing what they're going through, sharing what is difficult for them. What happens is the person who started sharing first doesn't feel heard, right? They don't, because there's no acknowledgement of what they have just said. Instead, the other person starts sharing on their own right. And so they don't feel heard or seen or understood or validated, right? And the tendency can be for them to feel like there's either a one-upmanship, sometimes it can become a competition of who has it worse, or it feels like an overwriting of the story. Like what I just told you actually isn't the accurate version of what happened, especially if what I'm describing or talking about is an experience with the person in question, like the person that I'm telling it to, right? Then it feels like there might be some tug of war over who has the accurate version of the story. Case in point, neither person comes back or comes out of that experience feeling heard, seen, understood, comforted, validated. There's nothing therapeutic or healing about that. It just turns into more of this tug of war. So what can you do about it? I've got three things that might help in this situation to change that dynamic and help it to be a lot more productive. Number one is that first and foremost, there needs to be a separation of spaces. Now, when I say this, I'm not talking about like physical space, like you and your like if we're talking about a romantic relationship, that you and your partner need to, like sleep in different rooms or whatever. Like, I'm not talking about physical space or a stepping away from. That can be helpful in some conversations that get really, really heated, where all you're doing is hurting each other and you need to cool down first. But that's a separate instance, right? What I mean about with separation of space is that each of you need your own turn to share and be heard and feel seen and understood. You need your own turn to have that experience, to be held and comforted, right? But those need to be separate instances. If both of you are fighting for that at the same time, as mentioned at the beginning, neither of you are going to get it. So you need that separation of time and space, and it needs to be a separate conversation. And so there needs to be enough time in between those conversations of sharing, right? So maybe one partner shares first, they take their turn, they share, they get to be listened to and heard and seen and understood and validated. They get their turn to kind of share their story, right? Then the second person, like you can't share yours right away afterwards. Like there needs to be a separation between those conversations. Otherwise, the person who shares first is going to feel like they didn't, like there's no settling, right? There's no space for that validation, that empathy, that healing, that comfort to set in, because they need to step into the role of giving and providing those things right away, right? It's too close. It's too soon. There needs to be a separation. When people are starting this, like it's a change, right? It's a whole habit change that takes time. I recommend the separation of a day. That can be really hard to wait a whole day, and a whole day might not be entirely necessary. But the tendency, of course, like we're coming from a place where we have this tendency already to share right away, rather than listening, because both people are needing to share, right? So to fight that, like the tendency is going to be for us not to leave enough time in between those conversations, rather than leaving too much. And so if you can give like a separation of a day, like sleep on it, let one person share while the other person listens, have a separation of a day, come back to it, have the second person share their experience, their story, their part of it the next day, then you can work out, between yourselves as a couple, or heck, this can work in friendships and stuff too. You can work out a smaller time frame, but the idea is going to be like, you need to look at, is there enough separation that the second conversation doesn't rob from the first one? And you also need to alternate who gets to start first. So this is another really important thing, because if one partner is always listening first and the other person gets to share first, there can be some resentment that builds up around that. So you need to alternate who gets to share first and be heard versus who listens. Listening is going to be really hard, right? When both of you are feeling like you have all of this stuff that you need to share, it's going to be a huge ego hit, and it's going to be really difficult to listen and create space for the other person when you feel like you don't have that to give. But someone is going to have to lead out on that and start. So you get to alternate who gets to take their turn first. Point number 2 is going to be a separation of objective from subjective. So often in fights, we are fighting over objective reality, over the right or true version of a story. The fact is, though, that none of us live in objective reality. We live in experiences that are deeply personal, that are colored by our personal histories, by our moods in the moment, by a whole host of things that make it deeply experientially personal and individual. And so if we have any hope of understanding each other, that meaning and that value and that pure understanding is going to come from individual, personal, subjective stories. That's where the actual value is. And so you can fight until you're blue in the face about who has the right or correct objective version of the story, and you're not going to get there. And that's actually not where the significance is anyway. What you really have is two parallel realities, two individual experiences of the same circumstance, let's say, right, that are personally individualized. And where the understanding is going to happen is if both of you step into each other's stories, right? And so you need to recognize that it takes a stepping into of the other person's reality, with the understanding that what they are experiencing and what they are expressing to you, so if you're listening, then they are authoritative insofar as they are expressing their own personal experience and how it was for them. Like, each person is going to be the authority on what it felt like for them. Where they are going to fall short is their understanding of the other person, right? That is where it's going to be less informed, not as complete, maybe not as well understood. And last but not least, takeaway number 3 is cultivate a spirit or habit of generosity. If both people are needing, and both people, because they're needing, they're in this kind of like survival mode, like tendency. The tendency is going to be to try to take. But as stated earlier, like, if you're both taking, neither of you are going to get anything. You need to give. And what happens if both of you are able to give, then both of you receive, and some really cool things happen here. You receive in a way that feels genuine, right? Because if your partner does something for you that is unexpected, that you didn't ask for, it just kind of comes randomly, right? Then it's unsolicited. And because it's unsolicited, it doesn't feel forced, right? There's like that mindset of like, oh, is the other person doing this just because I asked or just because I forced them to? That doesn't come into question here, right? You can feel better about the authenticity of what they're doing because it's coming from their own initiative, right? Now the question is, what do you do for the other person? What's going to inform that is stepping into each other's stories, right? The more we're able to actively listen and really understand the other individual, the more we understand them, what they are experiencing, what they are needing, that is going to inform what we do for them that is meaningful, right? Because we might do some things that we feel are serviceable, that we feel are nice and generous, and we might say, at the beginning that I'm giving and I'm doing all these things for the other person, but it's not landing for them. If it's not landing, it's because there's something that we don't understand about their experience. We need to understand their story more to really understand what they need so that we know how to give gifts